Hey everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal. Happy Sunday, March 15th of 2026. Now, I had the opportunity this week to fly out of town for most of the week. I was gone for 4 days and spend some time with friends. And I thought, okay, this is going to be the perfect opportunity to dip into two of my favorite books, listen to them on Audible as I was traveling. And two of my very favorite books that I haven't read for a while are both by Dr. David Hawkins. The first one is Power versus Force, and the other one is Letting Go, which many of you listening to this have probably read. You're familiar at least with the scale of consciousness, which is what Dr. David Hawkins developed after his decades worth of study. He is one of the most brilliant people that I started following and reading his work a long time ago. So the reason that this was prompted to dig these books out in my Audible, because I have them both on audio, which is amazing to just put them in your ear. I'm a person who loves to listen to things at a little bit faster speed. My brain just works that way. So I can get through content a little more quickly. But what prompted it was I had this idea and this thought process of authenticity and how we see all of these things in people and ads and reels and all of the things are generated by AI. And you can tell when something is, I mean, it might be harder and harder to be able to tell the difference between an authentic person and something that's generated by AI. I think it's going to get more difficult. But I do believe that if we are tuned into consciousness, then we can tell when something is authentic or someone or some situation. And I think it was my thought process is what can I tune into when I'm looking for authenticity or if I want to be authentic. And I just had the idea to look up, where does authenticity register on the scale of consciousness, on Dr. Hawkins' scale. And it actually surprised me that it wasn't higher than where I found it. It actually lives above courage and somewhere around reason, which is between 200 and 300, which was interesting, which is still good because all the lower frequencies like fear, shame, guilt, apathy, all of those lower emotions live below the calibration of 200. And when you get above 200, which is courage, then between there and reason lives authenticity. So then that just put the thought in my mind, well, why don't I just pull those two books up to the top of my Audible and listen to them and take notes while I'm traveling, which was perfect because it's always interesting to get on a plane. This was like a just under a 3-hour flight there and back, and I had, of course, the time in the airport and etc. But it's always interesting to me that most human beings are not connecting with each other. Uh, they're on their device, they're on their phone. In fact, one of the people I sat next to on the way there, it was so interesting because he was very friendly. He introduced himself and actually said, hey, my name is this, and I just want to let you know I'm friendly. And I was like, awesome. And my first thought was, oh, I might have an interesting conversation. And quite the opposite happened. I mean, he was very nice and all of that, but then he got settled in. He opened up his laptop. He turned on the screen and had some kind of background noise. Sometimes it was sports. Sometimes it was actually news. He had his seat back screen on. He had his laptop on the tray table on, and in between the different things he was doing, he was on his phone. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is so fascinating to me. And I love sitting by the window just because I love to look out. I think it's such a miracle when we travel, and I love just watching things. And it's always interesting to me when people just close the window the whole time and they're just sucked into their technology. And I'm not judging, it's just an observation. So while I started listening to this content, which is some of my favorite content, but you always find new things, what really, really resonated with me, and I spent the whole time journaling on, is the idea of compassion. So I'm just going to start with my journaling and just share this with you. So here's what I wrote. Over this past little while, I've been sitting with the ideas from power versus force and letting go. And one concept keeps circling back in my mind, and that is compassion. So, not compassion as a moral obligation or something you try to perform to be a good person. Okay, that's not the kind of compassion that I'm talking about, but I'm talking about compassion as a state of consciousness. Okay, this is where it gets really cool. So, according to Dr. Hawkins and his model, compassion emerges around the level he calls love, which is 500. Um, and what struck me while reading wasn't the number on the scale, it was the description of what life supposedly feels like from that level. And compassion calibrating around 500 where love is makes perfect sense to me. So it doesn't feel like an emotional intensity or a sentimental affection. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like reverence for life itself. Okay, that's what I got from that. So to me, also, compassion is like another way of seeing. Okay. One thing that really shifted my thinking is how he describes the difference between reason and love, because that's where compassion sits. It sits between reason and love. So reason, he places around the level 400. And this is where like analysis, science, and intellectual understanding live. Okay. It's the mind trying to figure out things. That's where that lives. Now, it's categorizing, it's evaluating, and it's building models. Okay, this is reason, and it calibrates high intelligence around 400, which is anything above 200, you are good. You know, you are moving up the scale of consciousness. And I think for many of us, this is a goal. This is our soul's goal while we're in this human avatar, right? So for me, it feels incredibly powerful. And it feels like most of modern civilization has been built around that, around reason, the analyzing, all of that, right? But reading his description about compassion made me realize something that's a little more subtle. Okay, you can understand the world perfectly well and still feel separate from it, if that's where you sit at reason. So not compassion yet, but reason. So compassion seems to be the point where the separation between reason and everything below it, this is where that point softens up, which then leads you into the higher states. Okay. So instead of constantly asking, what do I think about this? Or how does this affect me? Okay, so think about that. This is a subtle difference. Something else I feel begins to arise within me as I'm looking at this. And then my thought becomes this: what would support life here? Wherever I am, what would support life? Okay. What I've realized that this question feels very different in the body, very different than what do I think about this or how does this affect me, but what would support life here? That like landed so deep in me this week, as far as that is what compassion is. It's not performative. It's simply what supports life here. And that is wherever you are. Okay, so it feels like the whole idea that intelligence is not the peak. You know, that feels really strange. It feels like a strange idea to say that intelligence is not the peak of consciousness. Okay, so hear me out on this. Another thought that stuck with me is the suggestion that intellect isn't the highest level of development. Okay, it's a strange idea, it seems, in a culture, and in modern culture especially, that prizes intelligence, human intelligence. I mean, think about all the things that are attached to that. Everything, our ego, our identity, our ability to earn money. It's so prized, this intelligence. But I can kind of see what he's pointing to. Okay, understanding things doesn't automatically create peace, connection, or fulfillment. So just because you have the intellect to understand things, it doesn't automatically create these higher states. Seems so profound to me. Plenty of brilliant people that I know and that I see still struggle with anxiety, with conflict, and even with just full-on dissatisfaction with life. And here's the thing that I took from this section. Reason can explain life. but compassion seems to embrace it. So that's a massive difference, okay? Maybe that's why Hawkins places compassion higher on his scale of consciousness, higher than reason, okay? And then I realized this, that there is an emergence of joy when you have compassion that simply reflects, how can I support life here? Okay, this is where it gets really fun. So then here's what I wrote. Something else he writes about that caught my attention is the level above love, which he calls joy, and that measures around 540. Okay, and this honestly is such a beautiful thing about having this gift of time, especially when you're traveling, where you can actually dive deep into some of these things that are on your path to consciousness and growth and awareness, because unbelievably all of this stuff, and the higher each individual's consciousness rises, it affects the whole by tens of thousands. And even people like Christ and Buddha and Gandhi, they were at the point of enlightenment where one person could literally affect the consciousness and the atmosphere of high consciousness for 1 million people. One person. And I think that this is what's so powerful about each individual raising their consciousness. And I would say, first of all, if you have not read these books, put them at the top of your list. They are some of the most powerful books that I've not only read more than once, but I turn to in times when it's like, I wonder where this emotion or this characteristic resonates and calibrates on the scale of consciousness, because it opens up a whole beautiful can of worms to really think about. Okay, beautiful worms. Okay, so what he describes, so here's what I wrote. What he describes there about joy is it doesn't sound like excitement or happiness, like in the usual way you would describe joy. Okay, it sounds more like gratitude, and it feels quite stable. So it just feels like just you're vibrating at gratitude at such a high level. It just feels stable. I mean, imagine that. Imagine the stability of just constant joy, no matter what you're doing as you're walking through life, okay? And it changes so many things. What this feels like for me is a kind of quiet contentment with existence. Like I just feel, just by existing, there is a quiet contentment. And this doesn't, like this flowed over me. And my deepest desire at the end of this week has been to really work on this and let this be. And the whole letting go piece, that book, I would read that book first. Read Letting Go first, and then read Power versus Force, if you're inclined to pick up both, or maybe you haven't read them for a while. Pick up Letting Go. It's so brilliant. And then here's what I wrote. Dr. Hawkins even mentions that people in this range of joy, they appear childlike. And I love that he actually acknowledged that. So it's not like it's childish or naive, it's just light. Like think about how light the energy is of most children. I know that there's a lot of sadness and trauma and abuse in a lot of children. We live in crazy, chaotic times where a lot of children don't get that lightness, but this is a characteristic of being childlike. And many of us had those experiences growing up. Many of us gave that experience to our children and can see that in the children that we interact with. I see that in my grandchildren. I see that in my young nieces and nephews. One of my nephews just had his third baby in January, and he now has a 3-year-old, a 1.5-year-old, and a newborn. And there is so much joy in their household. It's unbelievable. Okay. So not childish or naive, just light. And then I wrote, it's playful. It feels playful and it feels unburdened, because children are not burdened, for the most part. Okay. So when I read that, I had this strange moment of recognition. It just felt, wow, that just felt, because when things like that, truth lands, you can feel it. Okay. The idea that as people let go of more of these things, fear, control, and identity, something very simple starts to come out. Okay, when we let go of these things, it's not complex and it's not spiritual grandness. Okay, think about that. What it is and what it seems like to me, it's just ease. It's just ease. I mean, we always hear about letting things flow, letting life ease. And I'm not talking about taking action and being proactive in things. I'm talking about just ease because we're basically letting go of fear, control, and our identity. That one is tough. The identity piece is really tough because fear can control our identity too, who we perceive ourselves to be, how we present ourselves to the world. It's all really interesting, right? So then, um, as I was listening to letting go, I wrote this. The biggest takeaway for me from letting go is the idea that growth isn't really about accumulating new beliefs or techniques. Okay, so really think about that. That the idea of letting go, truly letting go, it's not about accumulating new things, new identities, new beliefs. Okay, here's what I realized. It's all about releasing what we're carrying, what we're already carrying, what identities, what beliefs, what am I carrying? That's what letting go is about. When you really truly release, it's not like getting all the new stuff. It's releasing all the other stuff, the fears, the programs, the cultural things, the religious things, the matrixy things. You know, it's really that's it. That's it. So some of the things that I believe we're carrying are this: resentment, fear. This one is big. The need to be right. Okay. And the need to defend our identity. That one is big. That one is so big. So here's what I wrote after that. These patterns, they take so much energy to maintain. Um, when we let these soften, okay, when we let these patterns soften, Dr. Hawkins suggests that higher states like courage, acceptance, love, and eventually joy, these things will just raise naturally. They'll just raise naturally. Okay. So, in other words, this compassion isn't something you can make up or manufacture. You don't manufacture compassion. Okay. Once you release all of these other lower frequency emotions, then compassion naturally arises. How beautiful is that? It's something that shows up when I feel that the emotional barriers of my heart start to dissolve. This just automatically shows up. Okay. So then this, and this was from Power versus Force, because I went back and forth with my journaling, because what I ended up doing, which was really a fascinating way to read these two books, is I actually went back and forth chapter by chapter. So I did the first chapter of Letting Go, and then I did the first chapter of Power versus Force. And it was a really fun way to read these because I've read both of them several times. I'm familiar with them. I haven't tapped into them for a while, but it was a really fun way to read these. So one of the most interesting shifts for me after reading Dr. Hawkins in Power versus Force is this. In our everyday lives, power usually means this: influence, control, and visibility, especially in today's world of social media, all the YouTube stuff, all the other platforms we can tune in, and the visibility. I mean, even me in this on this little platform, this is visibility. Okay, we think that power, well, actually, in our everyday life, power usually means influence, control, and visibility. But this is what I love about Dr. Hawkins' idea of power. It actually means almost the opposite. Real power, now check this out. Real power is inner coherence. So think about that. That is real power. And I know if you've been on this path of raising your consciousness and really implementing some of these things that drop in as truth, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. You might have moments of it. You might have lengths of time where and you might be in a place where this is now your normal state. Okay. Inner coherence. So power is actually the opposite of all those other things, influence, control, or visibility. All right. It's the ability to remain grounded in things like truth, kindness, and stability, regardless of what's happening, and what the circumstances are. Okay. So the people who quietly radiate compassion, this is what I find, are actually exerting a deeper influence on the world. So that's what I was just talking about a little bit ago, is when one person raises their consciousness and raises the frequency that they vibrate, you are having so much more influence over the field than you could have 10 million followers on your social media accounts. You are exerting more power when you raise your consciousness. Like, that is so beautiful to me. So let me tell you again what I wrote. The people who quietly radiate compassion are actually exerting a deeper influence on the world. So here's what I realized they change. They change the emotional tone of the environment. Think about when you walk into a room, and or maybe you're in a room and someone with a high vibe walks in. You can feel it. The same way you can feel someone with a low vibe, a negative person, maybe who's having a bad day, or maybe someone just were angry in traffic and they walk into the office. You can feel that. So uh, people who quietly radiate compassion change the environment, the tone of the environment. They basically take conflict levels down. They can bring the level of anger, mistrust, or fear. They can literally bring fear down. Okay. And it creates a layer and a barrier of trust, and not through force, but through presence. Okay, so think about that. Not through force, but simple presence. In fact, that's one of the things that I always remembered when I first started looking at Dolores Cannon and all of her work. And one of the books that I read, actually in the beginning when I discovered her, was a book called The Three Waves of Volunteers. It's a brilliant book. Dolores Cannon did she did past life regressions through hypnotherapy for her whole life. I think she did it for 40 or 50 years. And you can find a lot of her work, not just through her books, but there's a lot of content on YouTube. There's a lot of her lectures. She's this cute, beautiful, radiating love lady. She's sitting on a stage in a chair typically, and she looks like your favorite grandma. And she just is amazing. But in her book, The Three Waves of Volunteers, she talks about all the information she gathered over the years of people that would be back in past, they'd be in a session of a past life regression, and there started to be patterns. And hundreds of people started saying, oh, I was one of the first wave of volunteers. I came in after World War II because the frequency of the planet was so low. There was death and war and sadness and trauma all around the world. And so the first wave are like the baby boomers. The second wave are the next generation who came in to simply be. They volunteered because their frequency was so high, just automatically. They came in. These are the people that will literally sit in a coffee shop, open their laptop, or just sit and sip a cup of coffee or tea, and their simple presence, because of who they are at their soul level, they volunteered to come in and just raise the frequency. In fact, what's interesting, I remember when I read that, she basically just said, the frequencies and the things that are happening on this planet really tend to hurt those people, the second wavers, because they don't really understand. They don't know that they're just here to be pure love. In fact, I have a nephew who I believe is one of those people. I actually have two nephews, and I believe my son, one of my sons, is that. He's in that age range too, and there it's fascinating. It's fascinating because just being present in that frequency raises it. So, and then the third wave are the children, the kids, the kids, the teenagers, the kids in their 20s now. They are here. They come in aware, and they're here to literally change the world. And you can see all these children that are just different. Okay. So I thought that was really super fascinating. So maybe the real goal of our development isn't just about becoming more intelligent, successful, or more powerful. Okay? That's what I think. I think it's something much simpler. So that's what I wrote. Maybe it's something simpler. So I think this is what it is. We need to learn to meet life and each other with less resistance and more compassion. We need to not resist people. We need to meet them with more compassion. Okay? And this is what I think. If this is the direction that consciousness naturally moves when we let go of fear and defensiveness, then it's not about becoming more complicated. Okay? It's about becoming more open, more kind, and more willing to just let life be what it is, right? So then what I did is I wrote out some quick questions because I think this is a really, really powerful subject to journal on. So these are some good journaling prompts for you to go through this week if this is something that you enjoy doing. And you might only get to one or two of these because these are really great. Okay. So what part of my life currently looks good from the outside but feels misaligned on the inside? I think all of us could answer that with something. There's something there, right? And then this, where am I confusing being busy with actually moving toward the life I want? That is a huge one. If no one could judge me, what decision would I make immediately? What would you do different if no one could judge you? And then what you need to do is ask yourself, who cares if people judge you? You're here to live on an authentic, compassionate life. That's why you're here. It doesn't matter what other people think about you. And this is a hard thing to get into place until it becomes easy. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes until you realize most people aren't even paying attention to you anyway. They're paying attention to themselves, and they're all worried about what other people are thinking of them. And other people aren't thinking about them, they're thinking about themselves. Like, that's the most important thing to take away from this, okay? So where am I confusing being busy with actually moving toward the life I want? If no one could judge me, what decisions would I make immediately? What emotion have I been avoiding that might actually be a doorway to my growth? That one's good. Where am I holding on to a story about my past that no longer serves who I'm becoming? This is a big, big piece of letting go. Forgive, let go, truly let go. Truly let go. What would my life look like if I stopped waiting to feel ready? Who would I be if I stopped comparing my life to someone else's timeline? That one's great, right? What am I trying to prove and to whom? What am I trying to prove? Who am I trying to impress or improve or prove? Who am I trying to prove anything to? You should only be trying to prove things to yourself. Who am I trying to prove? What am I trying to prove and to whom? So good. What is one truth about myself that feels uncomfortable, but also freeing to admit? And then this last question. If I fully trusted that life was unfolding for me, what fear would I finally release? We all know fear is a lie. Fear is a lie. It's all a lie, right? Okay. So then I've got this one last paragraph that I wrote up. I polished it up and I thought, okay, this is how I'm going to end this because I had such a beautiful week with David Hawkins. I kind of felt like I just brought his consciousness and his soul closer to me this week by diving deep for probably the 10th time on both these books. You know, I've been reading these books for a long time and I got through both of them this week. It was brilliant. It was awesome. So, okay, so here's how I'm going to end this. Most of our suffering comes from defending versions of ourselves that were built out of fear, needing to be right, needing to be seen a certain way, needing to control what life might bring next. But beneath all of that noise is something quieter and more powerful. As Dr. Hawkins describes in Power versus Force and Letting Go, growth in consciousness doesn't come from adding more knowledge or trying harder to perfect ourselves. It comes from releasing what is not true. Resentment, pride, fear, and identity. All of these are defenses we've been carrying for years. When those layers begin to soften, something unexpected emerges. Clarity, compassion, and a deeper sense of peace that isn't dependent on circumstances. Raising your consciousness isn't about becoming someone extraordinary. It's about becoming more honest, more open, and more aligned with the truth. Each time you choose compassion over judgment, humility over pride, or presence over control, you shift something, not just in yourself, but in the field of people around you. The real transformation of our world doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins quietly within individuals who are willing to let go of what no longer serves life and allows something deeper, something more loving to lead the way. So that is where I'm going to end it today. I hope you have an absolute beautiful Sunday, March 15th, of this incredible year of humanity changing chaos that we're in. But we get to be the calm in the storm. We get to bring compassion to the forefront of who we are as a child of God, a direct piece of divine consciousness. So thanks so much for tuning in today, guys. I love you so much. I'm so glad we get to connect every week, and we will see you next time.